Hello and welcome to E-Train Talks, a very special edition of E-Train Talks. If you're joining us today, then you've tuned into my 2025 Sydney Taylor Book Awards blog tour episode. My name is E-Train and I'm here with an amazing author guest. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is my second year participating on the blog tour, and I'm just so excited to welcome back to the show author Ruth Behar, a 2025 Sydney Taylor honoree and a Newbery honoree for her beautifully written and multi-award winning historical fiction novel. Just going to say that again, multi-award winning, Across So Many Seas. I'm overjoyed for you, Ruth, and so grateful to have the chance to interview you. Congratulations and welcome back to E-Train Talks.
Thank you so much, E-Train. It's great to be here, and thank you for all those kind words you just said. Very appreciated.
Yeah, of course. And I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited for this opportunity for you. And I'm so excited that the entire book world is seeing just the beauty of your words, the beauty of your stories. I mean, I've loved your books for as long as I can remember. Even before I started E-Train Talks, I had read some of your books. So it's kind of a full circle moment for you because you're back here, and a full circle for me because I'm such a big fan of your work. And I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to talk with you and celebrate Across So Many Seas. And for those who don't know, before we get into the heart of our interview, I want to share a bit about the Sydney Taylor Book Awards. Sydney Taylor, whom the award is named after, was an American writer known for her groundbreaking series of children's books written about a large Jewish American family living in New York during the early 20th century. Sydney Taylor's books are the first books about Jewish characters to become popular with not just Jewish readers, but readers from all backgrounds. They're still popular today. And the Sydney Taylor Book Awards have recognized the best Jewish children's and young adult literature for the last 56 years. It's almost as old as my dad. It's such a wonderful honor, Ruth. I'm so excited for you. And now, without further delay, let's begin. So, for those who have not yet read Across So Many Seas, will you share a bit about what the story is about?
Sure. Thank you, E-Train. Yeah, so the story is about four girls living in four different time periods in four different places. We start with Benvenida, living in Spain in 1492 in the city of Toledo, which had been a city that was very open to different cultures and religions, where three cultures coexisted, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. So Toledo was very well known for that. But in 1492, they are expelling the Jewish community, and our character Benvenida is leaving with her family, with her parents, and her two brothers. So that's where it starts. And so we learn about Benvenida's story and her departure. Then we move on to Reina, who several hundred years later is living in Turkey in 1923. And she too is going to get expelled, but she doesn't get expelled because of an order by the king and the queen, but because she upsets her father. And so he expels her to Cuba. In 1923, then we go to her daughter, Alegra's story, and she's growing up in Cuba. 1961, at the time of the Cuban Revolution. I'm very excited about the literacy campaign and teaching people how to read and write, but then she has to leave her country too because of the revolution. And then we end with Paloma living in Miami in 2003. She's inherited all of these different fragments of her culture and heritage. And she is going on a trip, on a vacation trip with her family to Spain. And she finds out that her grandmother's last name was Toledano, which
Ooh.
maybe means that the family originally came from Toledo. So she asks to go to Toledo, and they go to Toledo, and they find some surprising things there that connect them back to this heritage from 500 years ago. So that's in brief the story. And what I enjoyed writing about it is that you have to read it from beginning to end to see how it all connects. And you have to read to the very last page to see how all of these pieces of the story come together.
Absolutely. And earlier we were talking about first full circle. Well, that's what Across So Many Seas is all about connection and about kind of point A to point B. It's sort you have a destination in a sense. It all kind of, but there's not necessarily a different destination because it all gets tied back to Toledo. And I think that's a really profound idea that you demonstrated in your book. And of course, on the topic of the Sydney Taylor honoree that your story received, and also the Newbery honoree, Across So Many Seas, I'm just gotta say, one of my absolute favorite historical fiction and just books in general of 2024. And I'm extremely excited and grateful that the book world has given you so much recognition, given you so much love because you deserve it. Your story deserves it. And I'm sure everyone tuning in is interested to know What was the experience like for you when you received the call announcing your story was being honored for both the Newbery and Sydney Taylor Honor? Were you sure where you were and how you felt when you heard the news?
Absolutely. Well, I heard about the Sydney Taylor first, so I didn't hear about both awards on the same
Oh.
day. They were on separate days. So the Wednesday before the official announcement on Monday, that Wednesday before, I got a phone call and I was home right here where you can see me, right here at my desk in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was just at my desk writing or doing something related to teaching, one or the other. And the phone rings. I said, "Who's that?" And I sort of ignored it because it wasn't a familiar call, a known call. And then it rang again, and I picked it up, and that was the call from the Sydney Taylor telling me that I had been awarded an honor award for my book. And I was like, oh my God, this is wonderful. I'm so glad to be recognized by the Jewish librarians and authors and so on, book lovers. So I was really delighted. And my editor, Nancy Paulson, already knew, but she wasn't allowed to tell me
Oh.
until so I sent her an email and she said, yeah, no, I already know. This is great, but I wasn't allowed to tell you. So I said, oh, okay, great. So I received that, several days ahead of the announcement on Monday. So I thought, great, this is wonderful. I'm so happy to have this. It's great to have a Sephardic story recognized by the Sydney Taylor Committee. And that was it. So I didn't think anything else was coming to me. And then on Sunday, so the Sunday I was just at my desk right here, where you can see me in Ann Arbor, with all surrounded by my books and everything, or part of my books. I have many more, all over the place. And I was preparing for class. I teach on Monday, Tuesday, and I was preparing for class, doing some reading. And then the phone rang, and I didn't recognize the caller, so I didn't pick it up. And then it rang a second time. And I said, huh, I wonder what this is. It was about 9:30 in the evening. So I thought, I wonder what that is. And I just picked it up and I said, I just received a call from this number. And the person on the other end said, yes, you did. And that's because I have some good news to give you. And I said, oh. And she said, yes, I'm the chair of the Newbery Committee. And I said, what? And I couldn't believe it. And then she told me, and I was so happy and so incredibly amazed. And I didn't know that there are 15 people on the
Mm.
Newbery Committee. I didn't realize it was such a large committee, but then they all said congratulations over the phone. It was such a loud congratulations. And later I learned that there were 15 people in the committee. And then I understood why it was such a loud congratulations. There were a lot of people in the room. And so that was really lovely. My only regret after I hung up was why didn't I sing a Sephardic song for them? But but I was just but I was just so incredibly surprised and happy. And I just kept saying, thank you, this is incredible. Thank you, this is incredible. I was like so tongue-tied. I was just really not expecting that my book would get that kind of recognition.
Well, it did, and I'm so, so happy for you. We all are, everybody watching, everybody listening. And I mean, talking more about your story across so many seas, you did an extraordinary job tying all of your character stories together, despite the fact that they lived centuries apart. So, how did you go about weaving all of your protagonist tales together, and what kind of research did you have to do? And are there any correlations to your own culture and background in your book?
Yeah, definitely. So somehow from the very beginning, I had this idea that there would be four girls in the four time periods, in the four places, and they're all places that connect to my family history, which my father's side being Sephardic begins in Spain. Somehow it begins in Spain. So I had this desire to write about 1492 and to imagine it from a young girl's perspective because there just isn't that kind of information in the historical records. So I wanted to start with her. So once I got her story down, like I got Benvenue, then I thought, okay, this is her story. And I did do a lot of historical research. What's so wonderful is that historians have collected chronicles of the departure of the Jewish people from Spain in 1492. So you can read all these chronicles, and some of them are written by priests who were watching as this community was leaving their beloved homeland. We have to remember that Sephardic Jews lived in Spain for about 1,000 years. So when this expulsion happened, it wasn't like they had just arrived and they were leaving. They had been there a long time. They really had roots. in Spain. And so when they had to leave, it was a really big deal. So one of the chronicles I found, and it's an epigraph to the book, it's a chronicle from 1492, and it's a priest who saw this departure happening, and it made him feel so sad. He felt pity for this community. Why don't they just convert to Catholicism and then they don't have to leave? But then he noticed that they didn't want to. These were the people that were going to hold on to their faith, even if it meant departure from their homes. And one of the things that struck me from that chronicle is that he says that they were singing and playing their tambourines as they departed. And I thought, oh my God, that is so amazing that they would be singing, that singing would be happening as they went through such a sad experience. So that just kind of, I don't know, it was just so inspiring that I said, okay, somehow song and poetry is going to be a big part of this, and that's going to connect my four protagonists. So once I kind of had Benvenida and everything that was going on in 1492 set in my mind and on the page, then I could go to the others. And then, so I struggled with whether to have more characters in between, because 1492 to 1923 is a long stretch of time. And I thought, well, I
Right.
could have some characters. But then I thought, no, what I want to know is, what do we remember? What do we still feel? How do we still feel connected to what happened 500 years ago? So I thought, no, I'm going to put my other characters in the modern period and just see, how do we connect that far back? And so then once I had that kind of clear in my mind, then I went on to write Reina's story, which is the one in Turkey, and she's the one that's based on my paternal grandmother, but very fictionalized. I'll tell you later what some of the elements are that are from her real life story. So once I had her down, and I've been to Turkey, so like that was also inspiring to me. And I read about the Jewish community in Turkey, and that helped to create the character of Reina. Then I went on to Cuba, and I know a lot about Cuba, not only because I was born there, but I've been back many, many times and I've done a lot of research there, and I've written about the Jewish community in Cuba. And I've been back to where each of my parents lived in Havana, and I've been to where my father was born and raised in Havana, and where my grandmother lived. So I could have that setting in Cuba. So Alegra's story is set in that very place in Havana. And then Paloma, since I also spent a lot of time in Miami, I decided she'll be the Miami-based girl, and she will be biracial, because I know young people in Cuba who have that mix of Afro-Cuban and Jewish Cuban. And so that inspired me to give her that background, as she has a double heritage, a hybrid heritage to think about as well. And so the kind of each came together. But the hardest thing in writing the book for me was the ending. The hardest part was getting Paloma's story right, because she was the one that was going to bring the closure to the story. So hers was the one that I, wondered about the most, and wrote a lot, and then removed a lot that I wrote until I finally got it to where it had to be. So yeah, so it was fun to write. It was like a puzzle, just thinking about how all these pieces of the story would fit together.
Absolutely. And I think the Spanish Inquisition is one of the most interesting and tragic parts of our history, whether it's Jewish history or history in general. And I think 1492, that year in itself, is so overshadowed by stories like that of Columbus. But I think we really need to hone in on these parts of like world history, because we always say never forget, and I feel like there are so many parts of history that we do tend to forget. So you keeping these stories alive, you keeping the joy and also the somberness alive, because you talked about how Jewish people, they were singing when they were leaving Spain, because singing, I mean, we also talked about it with Benvenida. Singing is uh, like it's a connecting piece, because singing can be used as a joyful song, but singing can just as well bring you hope when you're in a sad, scary period of your life. So I think you just tied it all together beautifully, and I'm so grateful for you for writing such a profound book, such an important story.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that song about the girl in the tower in the middle of the sea, that became kind of the thread that connected the four stories, and it was fun to do that, and to think about song being something that connects people, because I am just so amazed that Sephardic Jews held on to Spanish. They lost the land, but they kept the Spanish, and that the Spanish changed over time because it was 15th century Spanish, but then they mixed in all the languages that they learned from the various diasporas that they were a part of, whether that was Turkish or whether it was Hebrew or Arabic. They added these different words to Spanish, and it was just such a unique Spanish that we're now understanding so much more about, that we call Ladino
Mhm.
now. But when I was growing up, all I knew was that my paternal grandparents spoke a Spanish that just seemed different from Cuban Spanish, but I didn't understand exactly how. It was very melodic and just sounded so beautiful to my ears, but I didn't know that it was a whole other language that they spoke. But because they spoke Ladino, they were able to settle fairly easily in Cuba, because with that old Spanish, they could speak to people in Cuba who spoke a new Spanish. So it's kind of amazing that you could leave a land and still hold on to the language.
I love that. And speaking to Sephardic Judaism, I think it's a lot of people, a lot of books, they talk about Ashkenazi Judaism. And I think many people watching may not know much about Sephardic Judaism and the areas where those of Sephardic heritage originated from. So will you speak to some of the differences between Ashkenazi Judaism and Sephardic Judaism, whether it be cultural or religious?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with both because I grew up with both. My mother's family is Ashkenazi, my father's family is Sephardic, so I got to experience both cultures and traditions, and that was really great. It was a little confusing at times when I was young, but now when I look back, I feel very fortunate to have known from a young age that there was more than one way to be Jewish. If I had only
Right.
grown up Ashkenazi, I would have thought that was it. If I'd grown up only Sephardic, I would have thought that was it. But I grew up with both, and two sets of grandparents that I got to know very, very well, that I was very fortunate to get to know very well. So the one of the basic things to remember, not everybody knows this, is where does the word Sephardic comes from? It comes from the word Sepharad, which means Spain in Hebrew. So that's where the idea of Sephardic comes from, which not everybody knows. And so Sephardic Jews are Jews who trace their ancestry to Spain. And one of the things that's interesting about Sephardic Jews is that many of us have last names that connect to Spanish places. So in my book, Toledano is the name of one of the characters, and so that's a connection back to Toledo. For a long time, we knew a wonderful rabbi in New York who was Rabbi Murciano, and Murciano comes from Murcia, which is another city in Spain. And my own last name, which is my father's last name, Behar, could also connect with the town of Bejar in Spain, which is spelled with a J, Bejar, Bejar, and it's near Portugal. And what we do know is that a lot of Jews that were escaping during the period of 1492 and before, many of them made the trip to Bejar, which is near the border with Portugal, and then went on to Portugal, which at the time hadn't yet had its own expulsion of the Jewish people. So anyway, so there is this connection to Spain, and that's one of the things that makes Sephardic Jews unique. And as I said before, many continued to speak a form of Spanish, Ladino, into the 20th century. It's kind of, the language is being lost a bit now, but it's also being revitalized. Many young people are learning Ladino. Just the other day, there was a Ladino Day celebration in New York. So people are kind of coming back to Ladino and trying to reclaim it and revitalize it so that we don't completely lose this incredible language that we conserve in the music and the songs, in the poetry. So all of that makes Sephardic Jews unique. And then we have different food traditions, different cultural traditions. And on the religious side, it's also different because Sephardic Jews, on the whole, tend to, when they go to synagogue, they only go to Orthodox synagogues. It's not like Ashkenazi Jews that have a whole series of different denominations. You can be Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative, Reform, secular humanist. I mean, there are all these different ways to think about your Jewish identity in the Ashkenazi tradition. But in the Sephardic tradition, the religion is mainly based in just Orthodox religiosity. So women don't get to participate as much as they do in, say, conservative or more reform types of Judaism that we have in the Ashkenazi tradition. So that makes it a little bit different. And then the food traditions come from the places in the world where Sephardic Jews have lived. So we have a lot of foods that come from Greece and Turkey, from North Africa, where Sephardic Jews have lived. So I was very aware of those different food traditions when I was growing up because the Passover Seder at the Ashkenazi grandparents' house was completely different, where we had gefilte fish and matzo ball soup and so on, roast chicken, simmis, I mean, all those things that we had with my Ashkenazi family, which I loved. And then the Sephardic Seder was so incredibly different, where we had things like stuffed grape leaves and egg lemon soup and a dessert called tish pishti made out of almonds. It was just completely different traditions. So all of that is interesting. And of course, Ashkenazi Jews spoke or have the language of Yiddish, which
Right.
is contrast with Ladino. So yeah, so all of those interesting contrasts exist between the two.
Yeah, I love that, and I think I wanna speak a little bit to the fact that you said that they're trying to revitalize Ladino. I think that's so important because we've lost so many languages over the years, and so many expressive languages, so many languages that were just beautiful in the sense that they were melodical or, had a lot of lyricism like Ladino, and, I mean, I'm so glad that it's being revitalized, and I'm so glad that you're sharing these stories, and, I mean, I a lot of the stuff that you just said about Sephardic Judaism, I had no idea about, and I think it's important to kind of bridge. I mean, there should not really be there is I guess, a cultural and religious gap between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Judaism, but I feel like there's connected in the fact that we are Jewish and we are proud. And I think that pride shines through in your story and in our cultures, like, in its entirety.
Yeah, I want to add that's so beautiful what you just said. That that we are a huge community of Jewish people with great unity and our pride for our religion and our culture and our faith and our history, but we also have all of this incredibly rich diversity. And I want to say, I would just a little shout out to a wonderful organization that's just begun recently called the American Ladino League. And this is a group of people, and I'm part of their advisory board that is seeking to revitalize Ladino and to teach Ladino to those who are interested and they have a get together via Zoom every couple of weeks where they get together and just talk Ladino. So
So
all these like wonderful efforts are happening, and there's lots of people also both revitalizing Ladino music and song and also composing new songs in Ladino. So it's not just like constantly repeating the old songs, but we can write new songs in Ladino too. And there's some amazing people in the music world and in the song world doing that as well.
so do you personally speak Ladino?
I can't say that I do. I can say that I understand it.
Mm,
Because of my Spanish, it's very easy for me to understand Ladino. When I was in Turkey many, many years ago, and I was walking down the street in Istanbul, there was a couple walking ahead of me, and I heard them speaking, and I said, "Oh, that's Ladino." And I rushed up to them and I said, "Oh, you're speaking Ladino." And they thought I was crazy, but they were speaking this Ladino that was so similar to Spanish that I could completely understand it. So I know some Ladino. I can construct some sentences in Ladino and now know words and turns of phrase in Ladino, but probably I couldn't, speak an entire paragraph in Ladino,
right.
but because it's close to Spanish, I understand it. And because I heard my grandparents speaking it, I didn't realize that it was Ladino. I just thought it was an interesting Spanish. So I heard it, and kind of my father knows more because he heard it more directly from his parents when he was growing up, so he knows more. And certainly I know like the Ladino in songs, and I know the pronunciation of words in Ladino. So for example, when we say daughter in Spanish, we say hija,
Mhm.
but when we say it in Ladino, it's hija.
Mm,
So just things like that, like things about the pronunciation of certain letters and words. I know, so I could speak a little bit of Ladino, but I probably couldn't speak for much longer than a paragraph. I don't have that kind of knowledge, but hope to keep recovering. And one of my dreams is actually to see if I can one day write a book of poems that would be in three languages, that would be in English, Spanish, and Ladino. one of my dreams. There's a wonderful person named Rachel Bortnick who started an organization called Ladino Comunità, and so people communicate via email to Ladino Comunità, and all the messages are written in Ladino. So I'm part of that. So I read those messages to learn a little bit more Ladino. And Rachel has translated a couple of my poems into Ladino, so that has also helped me to see what they will look like and sound like in Ladino.
That's amazing, and I hope one day we'll be able to see a three-language poetry from you, Ruth Behar.
Oh, I'd love
I would read it, I think everybody here would read it, and, when you were talking about the differences in pronunciation, I think that's just so interesting, and it's these slight differences that create languages, but also differentiate them from others, and I think speaking to language, I read that you actually are a doctor of anthropology, you received a doctorate in that facet, and I think that leads me to my next question. So, across so many seas, takes readers on an incredible journey across a wide range of times and lands. So, my question for you, similar to one that I've asked earlier, is was the research process for this book more challenging than usual, since you're writing about the lives, families, and journeys of four strong and beautiful protagonists? And how much of
it.
your anthropology background came in handy for researching and writing Benvenida, Reina, Allegra, and Paloma's stories?
Yeah, I think for this book I had to be an anthropologist to write it. Though sometimes the anthropologist and the writer wrestle with each other because the anthropologist tends to want to explain everything, and then the
Right.
writer is the storyteller. So obviously I don't want to be explaining because then I wouldn't be writing fiction, I wouldn't be writing a novel, unless I have a character who is an anthropologist and then she can do that in the book. But so sometimes the two parts of me wrestle with each other. I want to be the storyteller, but then the anthropologist wants to come in and, lecture and explain. So I think that happened a little bit as I was writing. That's I think sometimes I had to like quiet the anthropologist a little bit so that the storyteller could be heard. But then on the other hand, I think, the fact that I went to all the places that I wrote about was very important. That I've been to Spain many times. And my first research as an anthropologist was done in a small village in Spain in the province of Leon. So I've been going to Spain for many, many years since I was in my 20s. So it's been a long connection to Spain. And then I've been to Toledo many times, and I've been fascinated by the Sephardic Museum in Toledo, which is kind of like a mecca for anybody that's interested in Sephardic history and culture, because it's an incredible museum, and it's housed in a 14th century, in what was a 14th century synagogue.
Wow.
How they managed to preserve it, I mean, it was like plastered over, but they removed all that plaster and then found all of these inscriptions in Hebrew and Arabic on the walls. And what was the women's section upstairs is very, very clear, very clearly demarcated. And so I've been fascinated by that museum for a very long time. I've been going there for many, many years back and forth to see it. And just, I guess I didn't know that one day I would actually set part of my story in the museum itself. So I think this connection to places was very important. I've only been to Turkey once, but it was a very meaningful visit, and I got to go to the town where my grandmother and grandfather lived, this town of Silivri, not far from Istanbul. So I got to see, where I got to see her actual house and go inside and see her house. So that was really amazing, and it really left strong imprint in me and in my memory. And then Cuba, as I said, I've gone many times. I teach a course on Cuba, and I'm really fascinated by that literacy campaign. So I've thought a lot about it, and a lot of girls went off to teach people how to read and write. I was just so fascinated, and I thought, well, if I had been a little older, I was probably the kind of girl that would have wanted to be part of the literacy campaign. And so I put all of that kind of feeling into my character Allegra. And then Miami, I'm just so fascinated by what's happened to the Sephardic community of Cuba that now has transplanted itself into Miami and have been part of that community as well. So kind of these are all communities or places where I was able to spend time and see what they were like and get the feeling for the places. So I think that is kind of the anthropologist where anthropologists have to go to places. We don't just read about them in books. Like we have to go and experience the places themselves. And I think that was very, very inspiring for me. And I'm grateful for my anthropology background. And then there was a lot of historical research, as I said before, like looking up 1492 and seeing, as much as I could find what life was like for people at that time, and also finding the gaps in the historical record. Like, where are the kids? What was happening to kids in 1492? What were
Right.
they experiencing? And that wasn't there. So that was, a gap that I could fill with fiction. I couldn't fill it with anthropology or with history because we don't have the records, but that's where I could fill in with fiction. So that's the fun part of using anthropology and history and kind of seeing where the gaps are and what I can fill in with fiction. Where can I come in and tell a story and try to imagine a young person going through these historical transformations?
Absolutely. And I mean, one thing that's really interesting and stands out to me is the fact that when we read about the Spanish Inquisition, we read about specifically Benvenita's story, we're going back to 1492, the 15th century. And that sounds so long ago when you think about, I guess, North American and United States history. That dates back to the late 1700s. That's the latest, really. And maybe the Pilgrims in the 1600s. But I mean, the 1400s, that's kind of recent history in a sense for European history. And I mean, the fact that you were able to connect across centuries speaks volumes to your skill and your like brilliance as an anthropologist. And the connecting, I mean, writing history is one thing and writing fiction is one thing, but actually creating connections and using your historical knowledge to bridge gaps. That's so, I mean, it just really stands out to me, and I'm super duper impressed. I mean, I'm a kid saying that, and but still, I mean, I hope you know that that's so impressive. That's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. And so, one question, this is more in depth that I'm really curious about. So, in Across So Many Seas, as we talked about, you show the trials and tribulations of immigrations and evacuations in different centuries. How would you say the process or experiences of immigration has evolved over the years? And what are the major similarities and differences between then and now?
Thank you. That is such a complex question, and I do think about it all the time. So I never forget that I'm an immigrant. So let's start there. I was a child immigrant, but my parents were immigrants and my grandparents had been immigrants too. So, we had all these generations of immigrants, and I imagined my ancestors were immigrants at different times as well. So I think about that a lot, and I have a lot of feeling for immigrants today and feel very sad about the deportations that are taking place and how immigrants are being treated, how they're being shackled when they're sent back to wherever they're sent back to. It's just really painful for me to see. And so, immigration, or what we can call more generally displacement, has been part of history for a very long time. But there's different kinds of displacement. There's the displacement where you choose to leave a
Okay.
place, and there's the displacement where you're forced to leave a place.
Mm.
And there's, connections between the two, but it's different when you're forced to leave a place. And so I thought a lot about that with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and what it was like to be forced to leave a place that you loved, that had been your home. So I thought a lot about that, and kind of how, in a sense, it's not the same, but it was a kind of early form of deportation, of Spanish Jews. Like they were forced to leave. They were deported. They deported themselves because they were given the choice of conversion, but for many that wasn't really a choice because
Right.
they didn't want to give up their identity, which made a lot of sense. So I think we can see that immigration has all these different angles to it, and there's so many different ways to think about it. And then we think of all the immigration that took place in the 19th century, and so many European people, not just Jewish people, but Europeans in general, that made their way to the United States. When we think of the potato famine and the Irish who made the migration to the United States, or the hunger in southern Italy and in Sicily that led to the Italian migration to the United States, and then the Jewish migration in the 19th and early 20th century because of pogroms and discrimination. So immigration has been a way to find peace and freedom and a home where you feel safe and where you feel free to be who you need to be. So I think immigration is just such a powerful way in which human beings have expressed, the need for a home, the need for a refuge, the need for a safe home. I think that's what immigration, in a sense, comes down to. That's what it's about, and I think it has changed over the years. When I think of us immigrating from Cuba, leaving Cuba at that time, 60 years ago, you were only allowed to take one suitcase. You had to figure
Mm.
out what were the things that most needed to have with you, the things that would bring back memories. And so my mother and my grandmother and other women of their generation, what they put in their suitcases were albums of photographs, and they had these photographs in order to remember the place they were leaving. And when I was growing up in the United States, I would look through those photographs from Cuba, and that's how I ended up kind of, reconnecting with Cuba. First was through these old photographs that my family had kept. So there was the suitcase, and the image of the suitcase is something that is so strong for me, and I think about it a lot. But then later immigrants who are leaving now more recently, they can't even bring a suitcase. They're just bringing, many of them, not just those immigrating to the United States, but those immigrating as well to Europe. They just bring the clothes on their backs, and they're just trying to find a way to build a new home in a new place, or to help their families back in the home that they've left behind. So I feel like immigration now, I think it was always a very desperate kind of process for anybody involved in it, but I feel like it's even more filled with despair now, and that unfortunately immigrants in so many parts of the world right now, not just the United States but in Europe as well, are being viewed so negatively, and I find that really sad, because I think the majority of immigrants just want to work and better their lives and better the lives of their families. So it makes me really sad that we're going through a very strong anti-immigrant period right now, and hope that that will change and that we will come back to a more positive view of immigration. When we think of the Statue of Liberty, she was meant to be the mother of exiles, and let's not forget that the Emma Lazarus poem that's inscribed at the foot of the Statue of Liberty is by a Sephardic poet. Emma Lazarus was Sephardic. So I think that is also very meaningful.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that really spoke to me that you said is how immigration, for a lot of people, it wasn't a choice. And for instance, when you brought up that immigrants from Spain, Sephardic Jews who had to immigrate from Spain, people might assume, oh, they chose to not convert to Catholicism. But in reality, it's not a choice because Judaism is who you are, it's who we are. And I wanted to quickly read because you brought up the Emma Lazarus poem and we're talking about immigration. The poem is The New Colossus, and I just wanted to read from it briefly. So, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And I hope that Emma Lazarus's poem will stand true, and that immigration, as you said, will be viewed in a more positive light moving forward. And before we get to the last question, I just want to quickly say how grateful I am for you and for your story across so many seas, bringing a positive light, a positive attitude, and a positive mentality to the idea of immigration and sharing stories that are so meaningful, so powerful, so important, so timely in this day and age. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, E-Train. I really appreciate that tremendously. Thank you.
So, my last question for you is on a bit of a lighter note. So, you have stories like Lucky Broken Girl, Letters from Cuba, Tia Fortuna's New Home, A Jewish Cuban Journey, and of course, Across So Many Seas. And they're all deeply meaningful, lyrical, and important reads. And I, for one, enjoy your stories and look forward to what you write next. And on that note, are there any stories that you have in the works or on the horizon that you'd like to share a bit about, or that you can share a bit about?
Yeah, yeah. So let me say, I have a few. I have a few picture books. I'm very excited about picture books. And so there's a book that I have co-authored with my son that's already out there. That's Pepita Meets Bebita. and we co-wrote that together. And it's a really beautiful book told from the point of view of a dog. And it was inspired by when he became a dad and I became a grandmother. So that's a really fun book. And we have another book that we've co-authored that is in the works. It's just being illustrated now, and it's about Cuban food traditions.
Ooh.
Say that much. And then I have a book, another picture book that's about Hanukkah. Uh,
Yay.
Yay! That is in the works, and it's already, the sketches are already done. I don't know if it'll come out for this year's Hanukkah, more likely next year's Hanukkah,
Mm.
um, but we'll see. And that one is a Hanukkah story. It's inspired by my older granddaughter. I have two granddaughters, and the older one was born, she's now 4, and she was born on the 8th day of Hanukkah.
Oh.
S- She kind of brought all the light of Hanukkah. So that inspired my Hanukkah picture book, which I'm very excited about. I think it's all about miracles, but like everyday miracles. So I kind of gave Hanukkah another twist. So I'm excited about that as well. And then I have two picture books that I have drafts of that are coming along. Probably too soon to share much about them, but one is about poetry and art, and the other one, which I am co-authoring, the second one I'm co-authoring with my son as well, and that one is about immigration. So we want to make a comment about immigration from a picture book perspective. And then finally, there is a middle grade novel in the works that is a verse novel.
Ooh.
Uh, since I want to come back to my roots in poetry, and I love poetry so much, and I've been reading a lot of verse novels that I love, so I want to give that a try. So that's some of the work that's happening now.
Well, I'm so, so excited for whatever you're going to be bringing into the world, into the book world, and I cannot wait to dive into your stories. I'm sure everybody else has the same sentiment. So, this has been such a wonderful talk, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, and I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for everything you do in the book world. It's so beautiful. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. It's great.
I am thrilled and beyond grateful to have been a stop on the 2025 Sydney Taylor Book Award blog tour. Mazel tov, and congratulations on being awarded both the Newbery and Sydney Taylor Honor for your deeply beautiful, profound, all the fantastic adjectives that you can think of. That's what encapsulates across so many seas. I'm sorry, I have two copies.
I've got a copy here too.
You've got three. So when this comes out, it will also almost be Tu B'Shvat. So happy Tu B'Shvat, everybody. The holiday, the birthday of the trees. And for those of you watching, I invite you to watch my review of Ruth's book. I created it and posted it about a year ago now. And better yet, I highly recommend you find a copy and discover why this story is so cherished in my heart and the hearts of so many other readers. I cannot wait to read your next books, Ruth, that you have out in the future, whether they be picture books or middle grade. You're an author hero of mine, and I'm thankful for you.
Thank you so much, E-Train. I'm so grateful for this. I've loved our conversation.
Me too. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, keep reading, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.